very fortunate today to have a very esteemed panel of guests today with us. First, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Allison Sekuler. Allison is the President and Chief Scientist of Baycrest Academy for Research and Education. Welcome, Dr. Sekuler. And yes. And we also have with us Dr. Nicole Anderson. Dr. Anderson is the Associate Scientific Director at Baycrest's Kimmel Family Center for Brain and Health Wellness. So welcome, Dr. Anderson. And our third panelist should come of no surprise to you in terms of who she is. One of our residents, Judith Comden, will be joining the panel today. Welcome, Judith. Yes. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the microphone to Dr. Sekuler.
Thank you so much. I was saying to Wendy and others how exciting it is to be back here, because the last public lecture in person that we did right before pandemic was in this very room, and it was such a great crowd, and so I'm really excited to be back here. And I just want to say thank you so much to the whole Shepherd Village team, including Wendy, including Kathy, including Iris Chung and Angelica, for partnering with us on today's event and for hosting us. And it's a really great place. We'd also like to acknowledge our other partner, the Centers for Learning, Research, and Innovation, for supporting this event. And a reminder that today's event will have photography and audio and video recording. And by entering the event, you consent to being photographed and recorded. So with that, do you mind? I'm going to take a picture of everybody to document it. One second. Say cheese. Thank you. Now I can compare it with the last one and say this is a much better looking group than the last one. Okay, so we're going to start with a little bit of background about brain health and dementia and what the DEFY Dementia program is, and then we'll be bringing on some guests to have a little bit of a chat and then opening it up for questions from all of you. So what is dementia? When people talk about dementia, I think I'm supposed to do that myself. You can, okay, all right. When people talk about dementia, we can go to the next there. It's not one thing. It's really an umbrella term for lots of different kinds of impacts on the brain. So many people have heard of Alzheimer's disease. That is a type of dementia, but so is Lewy body disease. So is frontotemporal dementia. So is vascular dementia. There's also dementias related to HIV and so on. So there's a Parkinson's dementia. So there's lots of these different kinds of dementia all under this umbrella. And really what that means is that it's a deterioration of the brain that has had an impact on people's daily function, right? People's not just memory. It can be other things. It can be emotion. It can be perception. There can be other kinds of things, balance, speech. People tend to think about it in terms of memory. That's just one of the kinds of symptoms that you might see. And you might have heard about something called MCI, or mild cognitive impairment. That is when you're having some memory problems, but it hasn't necessarily progressed to the point where somebody is as severely impacted in terms of their performance in daily activities. That's one way of thinking about it. What's really interesting for me is thinking about this umbrella term. Everyone knows Alzheimer's because it is, in fact, the most common form of dementia. But it's also very, very unusual to have just Alzheimer's and nothing else. Right? Very often people have multiple diseases or disorders combined. So you don't typically necessarily see what we would call a pure case of Alzheimer's, right? So just giving you a little bit of background there for what is dementia. Now, what people might think is, well, dementia runs in my family. My grandmother had dementia. My dad had dementia. So I will necessarily also get dementia. That is not necessarily true. Genes can play a role in the disease, but it doesn't necessarily determine who will end up with a diagnosis of dementia and who won't. It turns out that at least 45% of the risk factors for dementia are things that you can do by changing, you can modify yourself by changing your lifestyle. So there's this great report that comes out once every couple of years in a terrific medical journal called The Lancet. And what The Lancet does is it talks about the different kinds of risk factors for dementia. Some are more important earlier in life, some are more important in the middle of your life, and some in the later stages of our life. But they all play a role. And that, I think, is really interesting. Like, would you necessarily think that early in life, your education as a child would have an impact on whether you are likely to end up with a diagnosis of dementia when you're 85? It turns out that it does. So what that means is that this journey on our health and wellness, it starts early. But one of the things we really like to emphasize is that you're never too young or too old to make changes in your life to improve your brain health, right? To decrease your dementia risk or to slow the progression of the disease if you've already been diagnosed, right? So the kinds of things that are listed here are some of the things that we talk about on our podcast and so on. One of these might be something like exercise, something might be diet, social engagement, cognitive engagement, what you're all doing right here. This is social and cognitive, hopefully. And, getting here, maybe you had some exercise in getting here. I don't know if they gave you snacks or you're going to eat after, but hopefully it's healthy brain food. All of those things, getting the right amount of sleep, watching your weight, your cholesterol, blood pressure, all of those sorts of things are things that we can do to at least have some control over what we can do to reduce our risk for dementia or slow the progression of the disease. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting is when we think about some of the sorts of modifiable lifestyle factors in the community and in residential care settings, right? So people might incorrectly think, well, if you live in an amazing place like Shepherd's Village, then some of these things don't apply, but they do. They just will apply in different ways, and they'll apply in different ways depending on somebody's physical ability, right? So my dad is quite lucky. He just turned 85. He celebrated his 85th birthday by cycling 26 miles. He lives in Massachusetts, and he cycled to New Hampshire and back. My mom got some peace and quiet while he was out of the house. But not everyone can do that, right? Because my mother, she can't cycle like that, but she can do other things. And even folks who don't have mobility in their lower legs can do things, right? So there's all different kinds of approaches to exercise, for example. And the exercise can be applied in different ways. We have at Baycrest, in partnership with the National Ballet School, a dance class that can be done while you're sitting, right? And there's also something out of the Hamilton Health Sciences, Jaros Center for Dance. They have a dance program for people of all abilities, physical abilities and ages and stages. Even people who can't move their legs at all can be doing things like, if you can move your hands at all, you can do grip strength exercises. Grip strength is a terrific thing to be training. It's actually very important also to reduce falls, right? So even if you can use your legs, if you're walking down the stairs and holding onto a handrail, you want to be sure that you've got the right kind of grip strength. So no matter what anybody's circumstances, we can all engage in some form of exercise, for example. Another case of how we can adapt different sorts of modifiable lifestyle risks to different living environments is seen in terms of cognitive engagement. So one of the things we talk a lot about on our website is music. Jay plays the electric violin. I don't know if I've ever heard him play. We'll have to get him to play on the podcast sometime. I play the drums. And, again, we're very lucky because I have enough mobility that I can play the drums. But I have a lot of friends who are drummers who have back problems or something. They're not able to play it the same way. But they could maybe play hand drums later, right? Or they could take up singing, choirs. And a choir is a great example of how to get engaged in music because anyone of any ability can learn to sing, and you can be doing it as a group, and so you get this social engagement. And it just, whenever you're singing in part of one of these groups, it fills your whole body with joy. And we have on our music episode an example of this. And music is just something that stays with us throughout our whole lifetimes. And it's interesting, even people who are diagnosed with dementia, as they progress through the disease, sometimes they can't speak, but they can sing, right? The songs of their childhood bring back really happy memories. So music can do so much for us. And even if you can't play an instrument, and singing, is another form of a vocal instrument, you can always listen to music, right? And it has this tremendous effect on our mood, and on our ability to connect with people and to think about these memories from our past. So it's a form of cognitive engagement. It's a form of joy. It's a form of social engagement. And whether you are living in a residential setting, whether you're living in the community, it doesn't matter. It's something that we can all take part in, and to help us to improve our brain health and to live our best possible lives throughout our entire lifetimes. That brings us to DEFY Dementia, which is a new initiative that is being powered by the Slate Family Foundation, as well as the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation and the Baycrest Academy for Research and Education and Baycrest Seniors Care. It was originally funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada, and the whole goal was to raise awareness and empower people about these modifiable lifestyle risks and what they can do in their everyday life to make baby steps, if you will, little changes that will optimize their aging journey and reduce dementia risk or slow the progression of the disease. And again, our motto, and we'll drum this into your head, so if you remember one thing at the end of our session today, is that you're never too young or too old to take care of your brain. One of the things that we were really excited to do before I go on, I think I'm missing the page here. So when we went on to start this project, we really wanted to make sure that we were doing a couple of things. Each of the different episodes, by and large, there's a little bit of variation, but by and large, each of the episodes initially anyway was focusing on a different risk factor, right? So it could be cognitive engagement, it could be loneliness and social isolation, things that we knew were related in some way to your dementia risk. And we wanted to make sure that we were telling the stories of people with lived experience. And these could be people who were living with a dementia diagnosis of some sort, or it could be a caregiver, or it could be someone who was aging like exceptionally well. So, for example, I mentioned my father, who was able to, on his 85th birthday, go cycling. He's not even my top exercise role model. My top exercise role model was our guest on our exercise episode, a woman named Ernestine Shepard, and she is also known as Granny Six-Pack because she started weightlifting in her 50s and then became a world champion bodybuilder. So that is like, she's my goals. So it was very exciting to get to talk to her. So she was talking about how she walks 15,000 steps every day. And she no longer competes professionally, but she's a trainer. And she trains she's 85 now, 89? 87. She's 87. She still goes to the gym and works out 3 times a week. And she's training other people. So it might sound unrealistic, but we thought it was important to show sort of, here is what is possible. But you don't have to be Ernestine to be able to get some of those benefits, right? So if I'm walking 10 minutes a day, I'm not walking 15,000 steps. I'm not winning championship bodybuilding competitions, but I'm still making a difference in my health and my well-being. And each of the different episodes is focused on one of these different kinds of topics. And in addition to having the stories that we hear from the people with lived experience, we have scientists who come on and say, how does this connect to the brain, right? And what's really cool, and you're going to hear from one of these scientists, Nicole Anderson, who was on our cognition episode way back when, is that we always make the scientists listen to the person with lived experience first. So they're not just talking in the abstract about what the research says, it's in the context of that person's story. And I think it makes you think differently about the way that the brain and life are interacting. And then we try to make sure that you have some takeaway messages. What is it that you can do to change your life? And we talk a little bit about what we learned from it and so on. Before we go on, we want to make sure that you're able to hear directly from Jay Ingram, who is my co-host on this podcast. If you don't know Jay, you might recognize him when you see him. He was the original host of Quirks and Quarks. Second host, who was Bob first? Oh, Suzuki. So David Suzuki was first, and then Jay was second. And then he also had, I think, Canada's very first daily science news show, The Daily Planet. It used to be called @discovery.ca, and then changed to The Daily Planet. And Ben, who is our producer, has worked with Jay for 30 years. Not 3 years, but 30 years. I knew each of those was a 10. So we're going to hear from Jay right now. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us because he is, I think, in Victoria right now. But here's Jay.
Over which all of us, young or old, have some control. And it's a very mixed bag. Some require medical attention, like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. Some are more personal, like maintaining fitness, maintaining your social connections, stopping smoking. But I don't think it's the wide range of risks that is a deterrent. I don't think it complicates things. In fact, I think it provides a much greater opportunity to choose ones that you want to start with. I think that's the issue, starting. And I have personal experience on this. Since we began the podcast, I've done some things, I've made some progress toward reducing the list, but not as much as I could have. Why not? Call it inaction, inertia, laziness, I don't know. But the important thing is, it's not so much the range of activities that deter you from starting, it's starting itself. And the best time you start is now.
He and I both, as do many people, have personal experiences with relatives with dementia. So it's a personal journey for both of us as well. And that's probably the case for almost everyone who comes on the show and that we talk to. One of the things that's been really interesting for us along the way is to be able to interact with people from so many different walks of life. And I want to just highlight a couple of our guests with lived experience. I've already mentioned Ernestine Shepard, who was our guest in the Let's Get Physical, Pumping Up Brain Health episode. And we also had on one of our early episodes a woman named Myrna Norman from BC, who was diagnosed 15 years ago with frontotemporal dementia. And she was told she had 5 years to live. So you can imagine she went into kind of a deep depression. She became very isolated. After a couple of years, she realized, if I only have a couple of years to go, I want to make the most of it. And so, as she puts it, she burst out of her cocoon. And she has now made it 10 years past. And when we saw her recently, she comes to a lot of these events with us whenever she can. Her diagnosis actually has been reversed now. So she's in mild cognitive impairment. So she's much more functional now. She started a program called the Purple Angels, where people living with dementia and their caregivers can get together and socialize. And it's really just improved her life and the lives of so many other people. We recently had a fellow named Dave Chase on our music episode. And Dave was talking about his spouse who had recently passed away. Unfortunately, he was a caregiver. But he was just talking about how amazing it was the role of music in their lives. And they were in a dementia choir, also out in BC. And singing for them was just a critical part of their lives. And so you can hear these different kinds of perspectives from the people with lived experience. We also, in addition to having the podcast, try to have different ways of sharing information. So the podcast, my mom won't listen to it because she doesn't like podcasts, so it's just audio information. We have a transcript, which she will read because she likes to read things. And we also have videos. And this is an example of one of our videos.
From cycling, table tennis, and weightlifting, to gardening, walking your dog. We know exercise is good for your body, but it might be a surprise, it's also good for your brain.
Exercise increases blood flow and creates new brain cells. That can improve memory, protect against dementia, and slow or even reverse cognitive decline. Exercise literally strengthens your brain.
Research shows that any movement is better than none. Everyone can find a way to exercise, no matter what your physical ability.
So exercise regularly and choose activities that bring you joy. As your body gets used to one exercise, challenge yourself with something new to maximize your brain benefits.
Every step counts because you're never too young or too old to exercise. Boost your brain health and decrease your dementia risk.
So just 1 minute and it's done. You can get all the information. So it's a very rapid way of getting the information, as is the set of infographics that we've created. So for each of the original episodes, we had infographics just with the highlights, basically, some take-home messages and actions that you can take. And these are all on our website in English and French.
And they're on the tables.
And they're on the tables as well. So you can go around the tables afterward if you haven't already gotten them and pick some up to keep for yourself or share with your friends. This is where you can get access to all of the information at defydementia.org. And one of the things that we had a lot of fun doing along the way was collaborating with different groups. So like we're collaborating with the folks here, we also collaborated with a group of people in Ottawa who have been making Canadian games, Canadian versions of games. Has anyone ever played Wordle? So do you know there's a Canadian version of Wordle? It's called Canuckle. And it's Canadian themed words, right? You play it every day, I think. And so, you know, my opening word for Canuckle is always maple, even though it's not theoretically the best, but it's Canadian. And it's great because they have little factoids about the words that link into Canadian history, so it's really fun. Then they also created a Canadian version of Sudoku, which you might say, well, how does that work? Because Sudoku, if you don't know, is a number game. But they replaced the numbers with icons that were Canadian, like a hockey stick or a polar bear or maple syrup and a Canadian flag. And then we thought, well, you know what? We have all these icons that we use in DEFY Dementia for the parts of your modifiable lifestyle risk that you can change to decrease your dementia risk. So we said, why don't we collaborate with them? And they had relatives with dementia, and so they said, yeah, let's do this. So this is the brain health edition of the Kanoku game. And so instead of having numbers, you have these icons. So that one is, well, actually, we could see if someone can guess what modifiable lifestyle might that one be that she's circling right now. Exercise, right, exercise. How about that one? A bed. Sleep, yeah. That one might be a little bit trickier. It's thinking. It's cognitive engagement. And then if you saw the one that has all 9 of them, it also has blueberries for food, and it has eyes for vision and ears for hearing. And it has people together for social interaction. And it has a puff of air because air pollution is also a risk factor. So we didn't get all of them in there, but we got 9 in. And you can play it with just a 4x4. You can make it easy. You can make it hard. Do you play this one every day too? No. Oh, you should. This one's fun. And so you can improve your brain health while you're learning about brain health. So I just think that's fun. And we also have, if people want to know, well, where is my brain health right now? We have a free online tool called Cognicity, which is a brain health assessment. So you can actually test your brain. I do this about every 6 months because it just gives you a brain checkup. So you know how we get our eyes checked regularly. We get our teeth checked regularly. Why not get our brains checked regularly? And you can do it on the computer in your own home. It's not a diagnostic tool, but at least gives you sort of a sense of how am I doing, right? And I just think it's really important for everybody to have a baseline. So I, every 6 months, 20 minutes, it's good to sort of check in with your brain health. I will invite the special guests up to the stage. I'll introduce them from here, and then but they can go on up. So our first guest is Judith Comden. She was born on October 31st, 1940 in St. John's, Newfoundland, the oldest of 5 children. Her family moved to Toronto in 1945, and after marrying and having 2 daughters, she divorced in 1966 and worked while she was raising them. In 1970, she pursued her dream of becoming a nurse, enrolling in a program at the Queen Street Mental Health Center, and she later joined the military in 1973. She became one of the first women with children to be recruited. She served in various locations, including Nova Scotia and Germany and Toronto, and she retired after 12 years of service. And after her military career, she worked in long-term care homes and quilt stores. And sewing had been a passion of hers since she was about 12, and it remains a key part of her life even now. Now she is living in an independent senior apartment, and she stays active in her community, offering help whenever needed. I also want to introduce Dr. Nicole Anderson. Dr. Anderson is the Interim Executive Director of Scientific and Academic Affairs and the Director of the CATS Interprofessional Research Program in Geriatric and Dementia Care. And she's also the Associate Scientific Director of the Kimmel Family Center for Brain Health and Wellness, which is, she'll say a little bit more about it, but it's a wellness center that also is a research project aimed at dementia prevention. And she's a senior scientist at the Rotman Research Institute at the Baycrest Academy for Research and Education. And she's also a professor of psychology and psychiatry at the University of Toronto and a registered clinical neuropsychologist. And Dr. Anderson researches memory and attention in healthy and pathological aging, as well as lifestyle dementia risk reduction. She's an active member of the Canadian Consortium on Neurodegeneration and Aging, including the CAN Thumbs Up multi-domain intervention trials. All right, well, welcome Judith, and welcome Nicole. It's so great to have you here. And thanks again to everyone who's joined us here today. I want to start maybe with a couple of questions for you, Judith, if that's okay. So first of all, can you tell us just a little bit about your background and your journey here to Shepherd Village?
Well, that was very interesting, actually. I had never planned to come into a senior's residence, but where I was living, it was time for the homeowner to move into one. And so she notified me, and I asked if I could come along with her when she went to sign the papers. And she asked, and they said yes. And so I came. So as I was part of her household, they offered me an apartment. And I had prayed about this. And I had said to God, and I know the exact date that I did this prayer, that I was going for knee surgery and I needed a place to live. And I would really like to know where I was going to live once I had my surgery. So that was on the 5th of April that I found out I was moving. And on the 19th of April, I signed the papers here. I had my surgery on the 23rd of April.
Wow, that is amazing.
Moved in 2 months later.
Wow.
Best move I've made.
Yeah. It's your prayers were answered.
Oh, definitely. Yes.
And while you've been here, what have been some of the habits or practices that you've adopted to maintain or improve your health, especially here in this environment?
Well, I never thought of it doing it that way for my health. I was invited to run for council, and I did. And I was on the council for 2 years as secretary. And I was going to retire then because it was a lot of work. Anyway, I got talked into staying on. I was president then for the next 4 years, of which the last 2 years were COVID years.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we went through the COVID. And we did well in the manor. We did very well. I run a tight ship. Between my nursing and understanding why the isolation and the other preventative things we did were important, and my military training. The front office, that's what Judith. The front office set up a screening table. I set up a screening table. Now, I could not do this alone without the help of a lot of people in the manor who'd sat at the screening. They did 2-hour shifts from 7 in the morning until 8 at night. Okay? 7 days a week and that. But yeah, they were very good. They were so good that we didn't have any cases. One suspected case, but it turned out to be not. So, it was very well. So I gave them all their pink slips.
But when you were doing the work, not just during COVID, but in general on the council, what do you think that was doing for your brain health?
Well, it was keeping it active, that's for sure. Yeah, it was definitely keeping it active. I had to think constantly and, talk with my team members and make sure that we were doing things that were going to be helpful for the people who we were counseling virtually, right? So it was a very satisfying job.
Yeah.
But,
were you doing things like that before you moved here?
No, not to that degree.
Yeah.
I sat on 1 or 2 boards, but nothing as involved as what this was.
Yeah.
Because this was really a hands-on, because you're living in where you're doing the work. Made a big difference.
Yeah. Have you noticed any changes to your brain health after making these kinds of changes to your activities?
Well, while I was working with the council, it was a lot more active than what it is the couple of years now that I'm off council. Though I have to say the council does ask me to attend a meeting here and there, and I appreciate that. The memory, I used to know everybody's name. I knew where they lived, and I was starting to learn the telephone numbers because we were writing it down during screening all the time,
I don't know any telephone number. I know mine, but everyone's just like you push a button.
Yeah.
And that's the telephone number.
Yeah, but when you're doing the paper and pencil, what you're writing down, you remember better.
Yeah, my biggest fear is I lose my phone, and I'll just never talk to anybody again.
Well, mine went dead a couple of months ago, and I went to my iPad and text my daughter to say, I'd phone you, but I can't remember your number. So anyway, no.
So if you had any advice to give to people out in the audience, or just anyone who wants to build a strong foundation for brain health as they age, what would your advice be?
You have to get involved. You really have to get involved with with your neighbors. And, even if you're just meeting for coffee daily. We also run a buddy system here, whereas we try to contact people on a daily basis or every 2 days, whatever it is, to let each other know how we are doing physically. And that's, don't expect to see me today because I'm going out somewhere. And I think that helps, type of thing. And they let me know if they haven't seen one, and I go and check on them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and one last question. When you started this journey, you said you were living in the community, and kind of you weren't planning to come into a residential setting like this.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes you hear about people who know about the potential of residential settings, but they don't really understand all of the opportunities that these settings afford. What advice would you have to people who are living by themselves in the community, but sort of afraid to even consider that move?
Yeah, I can understand being afraid and having to move. In my case, I was forced to, in a nice way. But it is so easy to become a hermit and stay at home and just, maybe have one or two friends. Sometimes our friends die and they're gone and we don't make new ones. You need to be involved with your community, whether it be your place of worship, going to play bingo on Friday or Saturday nights, whatever you wanted to do, go swimming, whatever you can do. You need to keep in touch, because as much as we sometimes don't like to be involved with other people, we need them. We all need other people. And that's the most important thing. You have to, you have to have friends. You have to have people you can talk to, people you can call on if you need help. And we have that here, so,
Amen. And Nicole, over to you now. I just wonder, in listening to Judith's story, what ideas does it raise for you about aging and brain health, and how the kind of activities that Judith has been involved in, how is that helping her brain?
Well, it reminds me a lot of my mother, who took a similar journey. So my father had Alzheimer's, and he was in a memory care unit in a place like this that had the continuum of care from independent living all the way to long-term care, which he was in. And as he moved in there, she decided, I'm moving in too, to an independent living apartment. And she also says it's the best move she ever made, because she was living alone in her house in the woods, no contact with anybody. But she moved into this apartment and immediately made friends with the neighbors on her floor, and they do the same thing. I don't think in such a formal way, but if they haven't seen her in a day or two, they knock on her door, give her a call, and see if she's okay. So I think it's moving into residential care does give you the access to those activities, to those facilities, kind of immediate friendships with the people around you. So I think it's a fabulous move to hit a number of different areas that Allison mentioned earlier that we know are important for dementia risk. So physical activities, social connections, cognitive engagement, etc.
Yeah, my mother-in-law down in South Carolina, similar kind of thing. She was living by herself for a long time, and became more and more and more isolated. She didn't want to even consider it, but because we're at Baycrest, which also has a continuum of different care levels. My husband had a chat with her, and she said, "Okay, well, she would look at it." So he took her to a place, and she loved it when she got there. And her health had been going kind of down, down, down. Once she moved in to the seniors care residence, she started getting better and better. Her diet was better. She's sleeping better. She's socializing. She's not ready to be the president of the council, boss people around. But she's on the upswing now, and she said it's the best thing she ever did.
My mother had dementia, and so did her sister. Her sister actually lived here in the terrace, and for a couple of years before she died. But my mother was always of the belief, if you had to go into a home, it was because your family didn't care.
Yeah.
And so I had to quit my job and move home for the last 2 years of my mother's life, because I always knew that that's how she thought, type of thing, And that's not easy to do. That's not easy to do.
One of our episodes is focused on caregivers. Because if you are a caregiver for somebody living with dementia, your risk can be up to 6 times higher than someone who's not a caregiver. And it's not because dementia is contagious. No, right? It's because when you are a caregiver for someone like that, you don't have time to take care of yourself, right? So what advice do you have just for anybody who, whether they're a caregiver or not, what are some of the simplest things that people can do to make sure that they are going to age well and maintain, the best possible brain health?
I think it's the things that you talked about before. So it's those risk factors that go into the model that you presented earlier. So it's physical activity, cognitive engagement, brain healthy eating, social connections, getting your hearing and vision impairments treated. So hearing loss is one of a big dementia risk factor. And a lot of people don't realize that. It's not that having poor hearing causes dementia directly, but people who have hearing problems tend to withdraw socially because they can't hear people in the noisy environments. And their brains are always working on like overdrive, trying to understand what they're hearing. So it's really kind of their brains burn out from all of that effort. And we have a bit of a stigma about hearing aids that we don't have about glasses, right? We need to get over that. It's not a big deal that people's hearing goes with age. So get the hearing aids. They're not perfect. We recognize that. But it's a lot better than not wearing them, and it will help to reduce risk.
Yeah, and the hearing test that we have, are we demonstrating the hearing test here?
Over there.
Over there. So it's a free hearing test. If you can't do it here, you can log on. I think we're passing out information about it. And you can just do it on your phone or on a computer or whatever. As long as you have headphones. And it's so easy to use. I was visiting my parents a couple years ago. I think I've told you this story. And my parents were fighting nonstop. They've been married for 63 years. And I thought they were going to finally get divorced. Because they were fighting. My dad was complaining that my mother never listened to anything he said, and my mother was complaining that my father just intentionally ignored her. And I said, neither one of you can hear. And I have a slight hearing loss, so I said, here's a free hearing test that you can take. I showed them how easy it was. They both took it. Guess what? That's why they were fighting. So my mom now has hearing aids. My dad still hasn't gotten his, but it has kept them together. So thank you, Baycrest, for saving my parents' marriage. One of the questions people sometimes have is, recognizing that there may be people here who live at home in residential settings or long-term care. How can they adapt, as we were talking about before? How do you adapt some of these approaches to those different environments?
Well, I think you said it very well. Like if you're living out in the community, you might be going to your local YMCA or community center. The beauty of a place like this is it's kind of a community center built into a residential space, right? You have physical activity programs. I heard you mentioning a pool. You have a pool here?
Yes, we do.
That's amazing.
And a gym.
Yeah.
Dance classes, gym classes.
Right, and probably other programming of
Kimmel East.
Yeah, it could be the Kimmel East. And I can explain what the Kimmel Center is in a bit. But and I'm sure you also have people like us coming in to give presentations or talks and things like that for that cognitive engagement. So that's already a way that we adapt from living in the community into residential living like this. And then in long-term care, it's a matter of the therapeutic recreationist bringing programming in for the residents, but similar idea.
Yeah, like we've got a lot of art programs at Baycrest, and even within Baycrest, if people who are in our independent living can come over and do our programs at the Kimmel Center, or the people who are in our terraces have programming there, and then even people who are in our long-term care, the art cart goes up to them. Right?
That's right.
So no matter where you are, you can have that. We want to have time for y'all to ask us some questions. Are there any questions from the audience?
Just raise your hand and Natalie will come with a microphone.
If you raise your hand, Natalie will come with a microphone. Okay. There's a question right up here in the very front. And maybe while you're coming, Nicole, sometimes people are a little confused about what's the difference between MCI and dementia. I touched on it a little bit, but can you explain, what is normal memory? Because your memory changes anyway. When should you worry and so on?
Okay, so normal memory changes are things like getting stuck for people's names from time to time. We all do that, no big deal. Getting lost in a place that you're not familiar with, like you're to visit a new mall, you might get turned around and forget which door you came in. Perfect.
I don't know where my car is. Someone's going to have to put it in a parking lot.
Forgetting to buy an item or two from the store, perfectly normal. telling somebody the same story or the same joke on different occasions. You forget who you told that great joke to and you start telling it to them again. Those are all normal. With mild cognitive impairment, they just become more frequent. So people get stuck more and more often. They might get disoriented even in their own neighborhood a little bit, turned around. You'll find that people with mild cognitive impairment will ask the same question over and over again within a single conversation. Those are the real hallmarks of it. So it's people starting to experience cognitive impairment, yet it's not significant enough that it's interfering with everyday functioning, so they can still live independently. And in fact, I've worked with some CEOs of corporations who have mild cognitive impairment, but with the proper supports of administrative assistants and things that can keep up with their job. And then from there to dementia, the dividing line is that not being able to function independently anymore. So needing help with doing finances or meal planning and things like that. So we go from mild cognitive changes as a part of normal, healthy aging to them being a little bit more significant, but we're still functioning independently. That's mild cognitive impairment. To the deficits becoming significant enough that it's harder to live independent.
All right. Question here.
My question is, I have problems falling asleep, but I always had those problems. They haven't increased since I got older. They're just there. And it's difficult, like if I go to bed, if I go to bed at 8:30, I will fall asleep a whole set of hours. If I went at 12:30, morning 30, I will still be awake. So my thing is, how does that affect me? But I always had those problems, and they haven't increased anymore since I got older, but they're still there.
So what's the effective sleep or the relationship between sleep and dementia? And do you have any tips for her on how she might improve her sleep?
So there's a definite link between sleep and dementia risk. Having insomnia is a risk factor. Having sleep apnea, that's when people stop breathing for moments of time throughout the night. And people who have sleep apnea, that can be like 70 times a night. They stop breathing and wake up, not to the point that they know that they're awake, but just wake up enough so that their body tells them, hey, start breathing. Those are real risk factors. However, I always like to remind people that there's huge individual differences. Some people need 9-10 hours of sleep at night so that they can function the next day. Other people need 5 hours of sleep. If you've had this your whole life and you don't feel like it's affecting your functioning, then I wouldn't worry about it. If you feel like it is affecting your functioning, then I would recommend looking into books about sleep cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a fairly new concept, but it's all about good sleep hygiene habits. If you can't fall asleep, get out of the bedroom so that you're only associating the bedroom with sleep. Get up and do something else until you feel groggy again. But there's a lot of tips in that sleep CBT or sleep cognitive behavioral therapy that seem to be very effective.
We're laughing at each other because I think we have the same issues. Yeah. And for me, that's the one thing I struggle the most with. But I've made a little bit of progress because one of the things I tried to do is follow a routine right before bed. So, whatever it is sort of, it puts your mind into, this is part of me going to sleep. So your body has a signal. And I never had done that really before. And I also have trained myself, this is so hard for me, not to check my phone in the middle of the night. I'll hear a ding. My family's all over the world, and so they message at different times. And if you pick it up and just look at it, and they're like, oh, I'll just check one more thing, and then it's like 3 hours later. So I have trained myself not to do that.
You did have sleep habits when you were a kid. That's what we do with our children, right? We give them a bath, we read them a book.
No, my parents didn't raise her that way.
But I think we did do that as parents because that's our way of training the kids that this is the routine, and then you go to sleep. And we forget that as we get older. And yeah. It's a good thing to have those routines.
Yeah. The other thing I tried was mindfulness meditation. But what's interesting is some of the techniques work differently for different people. So for some people, a visualization kind of approach works. For some, sort of thinking about different parts of your body works. For some, counting and breathing works. So you have to find the one that works for you. I found one finally that works for me, which is counting and visualizing the numbers moving in and out at the same time. And I can now fall asleep on number 6, where I never could before. So, yeah. But it takes a little trial and error, but...
Well, it's not doing those things. It's that I'm always thinking, because I'm a writer, I'm always thinking, what should I write next?
Yes. Yeah.
You know, could I start writing this right now? And then I'm up half the night thinking about what I'm going to write, or what poem I'm going to write, or what thing I'm going to do.
Yeah. Well, I think that is the same issue that I have the brain run. And so that's why, for me, doing the counting is useful and the visualization at the same time, because if you're thinking the number 1 and you breathe in and the number 1 comes toward you and then you breathe out and you're saying 1 and you're saying 1 1 1 1 2 2 2 2 2 while you're breathing, you can't think about anything else. And so it's a way of distracting your brain from all of the more interesting things it could be thinking about. So that sort of thing is very useful for brain runners like you.
Yes, I know this is about dementia, but I would like to know the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's. I have my sister-in-law. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in her 50s, and she's in the nursing home in Scarborough. Why even so early? What's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so for your first question, Allison talked about it a bit before. I describe it a little bit differently, that dementia is the symptom of a brain disease. So dementia refers to the cognitive impairment, which could be memory, it could be language, it could be problem solving, that is significant enough to start interfering with everyday functioning. And you can have dementia due to any number of different brain diseases that cause dementia, and of those, Alzheimer's is the most common brain disease that causes dementia. Now, your sister getting it in her 50s, that's very unusual, and there's only a couple kinds of dementia that tend to do that. The fact that you're here, I presume not in your 50s, bodes really well that you didn't get whatever gene she got. But that's very rare. Usually the onset is more in the 70s and later. No, Alzheimer's is the brain disease that causes dementia. So Alzheimer's is the plaques and the tangles, the junk building up in our brain that causes us to have cognitive problems. That's called dementia. So think of it with arthritis. You have swelling and pain. That's the symptom of the disease of arthritis. With Alzheimer's, the plaques and tangles are causing the cognitive impairment.
There's also different kinds of arthritis, right? So they're all called arthritis. But there's different diseases that can lead to a diagnosis of dementia, right? So Lewy body disease can also lead to dementia. Alzheimer's can lead to dementia. Vascular issues can lead to dementia, and so on. So there's multiple kinds. The guests that we had actually on our 3rd episode, which was the episode on cognitive engagement, which Nicole was our scientist on that one, on cognitive engagement. Dr. Rebecca Chop was our guest there, and she also had young onset Alzheimer's. She spoke to us 10 years after she was diagnosed and had just written another book. So great outcome for her.
Hi there. I'm a caregiver for my mom, and I have found that any kind of change that's introduced to her daily routine is traumatic, and I don't know how to best help her manage that. Any thoughts?
Well, let me start with you, just as someone who's healthy aging. How do you like change?
I've never liked change, but I've lived long enough to know that it happens, and you either adjust to it or your life is not the same. So, I talk to myself a lot about it, but, so...
And her problem is that she can't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then it's almost like Groundhog Day.
Yeah. Nicole, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there is evidence about this too, that when people move into long-term care because they're having memory issues, that change takes a hit initially. So it takes people some time. It takes a few weeks before that new scene then becomes normal, the new normal, and then they kind of become comfortable again. But that, you're right, it's like if you have memory impairments, you're going off of more your habits, right? You're surviving on more of that habit kind of memory. And so that change is very disruptive for people who are having those memory problems. But then things settle down once they can make new habits in that new scenario.
Yeah. And there's certain things that you can do, like if you know certain things historically, calm her down, like certain songs, for example, right? Or for my husband, if he ever is in that situation, I'm having him make a dementia list for me so that I know it's this Yankee game that he wants to watch. If he's in a bad mood, that'll make him happy, right? So if there's certain things that you know, or if you can reintroduce routine, then that helps. But there's also sometimes a problem where because if they can't remember, they may have forgotten, say, that a spouse died or something like that. We have an episode actually recently, episode 16, called Lying for Love, that talks about that as well. So how do you adapt to this when there's change and they don't even remember that there was change? You have to keep reintroducing it each time. It can be traumatic.
Well, yeah, I found that, and then she gets very stubborn because she thinks that she's right and I'm wrong.
Right. And that's in the Lying for Love episode. It's about ethical lying, and sometimes if your goal is, let's leave the person that I'm visiting happier than they were when I first arrived, sometimes it makes sense to sort of go along. You can be time shift into their environment.
As I find also that after the fact, I have to do damage control with people around her, and that's exhausting.
Yeah. Nicole, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I mean, when my father had dementia, in the beginning, my mom would try to correct him all the time, and I told her, don't do that. Unless it's a matter of safety, that's a different issue, but otherwise just go along with it. And once she started doing that, she was a lot less stressed out, and he was a lot less agitated too. So
I don't have my dad as that buffer. So I find that, I try to leave her less stressed, but then the stress falls on me. Yeah. I'm sure other people have dealt with that too. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, maybe if you check out the Lying for Love episode, stress is a huge part of that, right? And how do you deal with it? How do you make sure that you're having a conversation that can time shift, but in a way that's not going to get caught in a lie, if you will, and then cause more problems later? So there's a good number of suggestions there. Did you want to give some advice on how to deal with this?
I was living at home, and my brother was living in the house, my mom's house then too. And when I couldn't get her to do things, which was a lot of times, I would call my brother. And she would always calm down with my brother. But I also had PSWs coming in, and I noticed that she would get agitated with a new PSW. So I called the agency and asked if I could please have the same woman all times. And that made it a lot easier, She always hated being bathed. She always used to say, whoever heard of having 2 baths in 1 week? Okay? She was used to her Saturday night bath because she was 85 when she died, and this is quite some time now. She got her bath on Saturday night. But we found that with her, she would fight a little bit. My brother might have to intervene momentarily, but the girl was able to get Mom bathed, and then she'd come out and sit in a kitchen chair, and I would blow dry her hair, and she loved having her hair done. So by that time, she was fine. But no, there was times when, she would yell at me quite, if I asked her to sit, she would stand, So things are very difficult, I feel for you.
Well, and I think it's also the person that's caregiving the most or the most frequently gets the brunt of things.
Yes. And you absolutely have to remember to take care of yourself so that you can take care of someone else, right?
That's what my husband keeps telling me, so go to the Y.
Absolutely. You need some respite. Another question?
Thank you. to participate in this research study, does that include an MRI?
Oh, for the survey, no, there's no MRI for that. No. But there is a group called the Toronto Dementia Research Alliance. We're part of that at Baycrest and a couple of other places, and there's a whole listing of research studies that people can be involved in, some from our group and some from others, and some of those would include MRIs.
Yeah, my other question, it's just something I wanted to share, because I saw my mom deal with my dad, but from long distance. I live in Canada. My brother lives in Germany. My mom and dad were in England. Fortunately, I had a cousin who could help. But my mom was strong, and she took care of my dad. It was noticeable at 75. He died at 87. She had a lot of issues. He got violent sometimes. Wanted to see his mom, but my mom, through the Alzheimer's Society, learned how to deal with that. She would not put him in a home because that was just not what you do, you know. I saw what she went through. And saw when I visit quite often. I told my daughter quite some time ago, my mind is sound right now, but you have my permission if I have Alzheimer's to put me in a nursing home and don't feel guilty.
Yes.
Just check on me twice a week that I'm getting fed and no bruises. To make sure I'm being well cared for. But I think that will put a lot of parents' mind of people her mind at ease. You know that I told her that.
Yeah, it's lovely. I mean, to be able to give that permission in advance, because that guilt is really real, isn't it? Yeah.
I know I told my mom, I was like, no questions asked. When you need to make that call and make that move, no, I'm not going to question you at all. And you could just see her relax. So, yeah.
I have a mom who is now 88, and I find that during her lesser years, she was more disagreeable. She was more nagging. She was a lot of things that she's not now. Now she's happier in some ways. And we're trying to get around that to say, how come she wasn't happy when she was younger? Now she's all happy and always smiling. And I'm our oldest daughter, so I have meningitis. So all of my life, I lived with her. When it came to me, she was always overbearing. And I found myself in that place where I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't do anything without her tagging on. When my dad died, she took me to my bed for 4 years. So my siblings had to say, Mom, you can't take her to bed. She needs her space. And I didn't really have anyone to talk to, so I said the same like this lady here. I said, God, when is it going to be okay that I find a place where I could live and be on my own? 2021, December the 10th, he answered me a prayer. Oh, so
That's great. Yeah.
yeah, and it's been a hard adjustment for me. So now I'm on SeniorFlicks, and I find that I'm writing a book now about my life. And during that time, when I was living with my mom, I noticed that times where she would faint, and I was the only one that was there to say, now what do I do? When do we put her in a home?
Nicole, I wonder if you can talk about, there was a lot of things. I can't wait to read your book and your book. Who's not an author here? It's a whole room filled with authors. Can you talk a little bit about how mood sometimes changes with dementia? I mean, in this case, maybe it went from negative to positive, right? Which if you're going to go in a direction, that's the direction you want to go. But often it can go the other way. But can you talk right about the mood?
Yeah, it depends on the kind of dementia that it is, and I don't know if that's what's going on with your mom. But people can have personality changes with dementia, and most often it goes in a negative direction where people get agitated and can become violent at times. I think we heard that earlier. But sometimes it goes in the other direction and people, start giggling a lot. It's just don't have the same control over their emotions, seem happier more of the time. So it can go in two directions. Dementia doesn't always affect people's personality, but it does in about a third of the cases. And so, I agree. If it's going to go in a direction, it's better to go in that direction.
Yeah. And how do you know when it's time for someone who's living in the community to, you're not able to take care of someone at home anymore? How do you know?
It comes down to safety. Like if that person is no longer safe at home alone, and you can't hire 24/7 care to be with them at all times, then that's the time to go, because that's number one importance, is keeping people safe.
Did you have experience with your mom on that? Or?
Yeah, I'm the oldest of 5, so we all talked, about what would happen. And the first thing that happened was my brother moved in with my mother, so that made things a little easier. But it wasn't always easy at all.
Yeah,
And she got mad at me one Sunday. I went into the bathroom and I heard the front door close, and I wasn't more than 2 to 3 minutes. I come out and my mother was not to be seen, and we lived on a corner and we were getting ready to go to church. So I had to go down and wake up my brother, and we hopped in the car and drove up and down the streets till we found her.
Yeah.
Which she was walking away from the church. She was only 5 blocks from church, So it gets very scary at times.
Yeah.
You never know, but
that's right.
Otherwise she was pretty okay most of the times.
Yeah. And the other thing I think that your question and comments raise is the fact that different kinds of residences really are not one size fits all. I mean, when we think about long-term care homes, in our long-term care home at Baycrest, I think it's about 80% of the residents are living with dementia, right? But we do have people who don't have dementia but may have other physical issues and need other support for other reasons. What we've tried to do is to make sure that they're grouped, if you will, on different floors as much as possible, because you want people to have the right kind of care and the right level of care, right?
With the right people around. It sounds like when you were in hospital, all the other residents had dementia, and ideally that wouldn't be the case. You'd be with other people recovering from hip surgery or whatever, and that you could talk with. And that's what we try to do at Baycrest. So,
yeah, and it's hard. I mean, I think, the current system, we're really grateful to the government for support that they give us for a lot, but clearly there's a lot more that needs to be done to support people as we're aging. to make sure that we're getting the right kind of care at the right time in the right way. So,
yeah, has dementia got worse in the last 20 years? Because I've been hearing more dementia than ever. Like, did COVID cause more dementia? Is it our environment? Is it the stress? Like, I don't remember people back in the 70s and 80s having dementia. They just grew old and passed away, you know? Like you guys are studying it. I don't know, is it true or?
So I'll start with the first part, then you can speak COVID. No, absolutely not. Life expectancy has increased, and that's a contributor because age is the biggest risk factor of them all, but obviously we can't do anything about that one, about getting older. And we have the population trend of the baby boomers moving into that age bracket. So it's just a sheer number of people who are in the age bracket where people get dementia has skyrocketed. And so that's why the numbers are going up. That's the prevalence. The number of people who have dementia is really going up. After the baby boomers and my Gen Xers get in there, we should start to see the prevalence go down. But actually the incidence of dementia, which is the likelihood that any one of us will get it, is actually on the decline in developed countries because we're getting better at treating the risk factors for dementia, the high blood pressure, the high cholesterol, the diabetes, and encouraging people to be more active and to eat more healthfully. So the things we're doing here is contributing to actually the likelihood that any one person will get it declining.
And I mean, on that topic, in that review that we talked about in the Lancet report, where it says what % of the global risk for dementia is linked, say, to smoking, that actually went down because there have been public awareness campaigns that smoking is bad for you for a whole bunch of reasons. And so globally, the risk has decreased. That doesn't mean that it's decreased everywhere, because you mentioned developed nations. And so in the low and middle income countries, actually the demographics are different and the risk factors are different. So, you know, when you're talking about, you know, the baby boomers are going down, that's in the North American setting, for example. But in Africa is actually aging much more rapidly than North America. So while we're going to be sort of plateauing or maybe even getting a little bit younger, they will be tripling the number of older people when we're sort of getting to a double number in the rest of the world. So Africa, South America, some of those places we're going to, if we don't change anything, see a big increase in the incidence. So it's a global issue we really need to be tackling. And I think probably one reason that you're thinking, where's it all coming from? Yes, part of it is there's more older people, but part is the awareness raising that's happening, right? So we talk about it a lot more. In terms of does COVID cause dementia, it's too early to say now, but we actually have been doing some work on COVID, as have a number of other people around the world. It absolutely gets into your brain. It's a whole body disease. It gets into your lungs. It gets into your heart. It affects every part of your body. What we don't know is long-term, what is the effect, but there have been other viruses like HIV that can cause a disease that ends up with a certain form of dementia in some cases. But then again, with HIV now you can control it with drugs, and so fewer people are getting to that stage. So hopefully with COVID, we will get there. We'll have a better understanding and be able to treat it. But generally what we see is that even if you have, you know, all sorts of other predisposing factors, having a better diet, getting better sleep, getting more exercise, socializing, cognitive, all of those sorts of things can help to decrease your risk. So one thing can counteract another. Better medications. You want to talk about the recent drugs?
Yeah, so we've never had a drug for Alzheimer's disease that affects Alzheimer's disease. There were drugs out there that helped with the symptoms of Alzheimer's. So you might have heard of Aricept before. That treated the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, but didn't affect the disease itself. However, in the States, 3 drugs have been approved that treat the disease. They clear the plaques out of the brain. And we think that one of them will be approved in Canada, maybe very shortly. So this drug absolutely, positively, effectively clears amyloid or the plaques out of the brain. Whether that will have a big impact on symptoms remains to be seen. The impact so far in the studies published, the impact on cognition has been rather small. Also, these drugs can cause brain swelling and stroke, so you have to be monitored very carefully, and they require a positive PET scan showing that you have plaques in your brain, and we don't have PET scanners all over Canada. So there's huge equity issues, and the drug will cost like $40,000 a year as well. So it's not a panacea. This is not like Alzheimer's will be gone in 5 years. But it still is very hopeful. It's the first drug that actually treats Alzheimer's. So we're in the right direction, and I think it will get better and better with time.
Yeah, we're working at Baycrest to do something that we call precision aging. So you might have heard of precision medicine. When I was growing up, just like you were saying, is dementia worse? When I was growing up, you didn't say the word cancer, right? Because it was something you couldn't treat. It was something you didn't really understand. And now, my mother, she had breast cancer 20 years ago, and she just turned 85. She just had another bout of a form of breast cancer. She wasn't even worried. She's like, I just got to get some radiation, not a big deal. I mean, 20, 30, 40 years ago, that she wouldn't be with us, right? So what we're trying to do is to take the precision approach that they've developed in cancer and apply that precision medicine approach to aging and brain health, which is why we call it precision aging. The reason I mention that is we have it sounds like science fiction, but it's something we're hoping we'll get funded to do, where we can take cells from somebody with a particular kind of dementia and then grow a version of their brain in a dish and then use that to test what sort of drugs might work on that particular person, with the hope, because that's what they've been doing in cancer, with the hope that we could then have a more targeted approach to the treatment. We're not quite there yet. If we come back in 5-10 years, you can ask us again if there's a cure. But first of all, I want to say, Judith and Nicole, thank you so much for joining me. Let's have a round of applause for two amazing women. Just so that you know, for any of the knowledge products, you can visit DEFYDementia.org and subscribe to our podcast. We are going to be having our second virtual DEFY Dementia event on December 2nd. So you can go to DEFYDementia.org to learn more about that. If anyone is interested in participating in research, as we heard before, you can also complete a post-event feedback survey in your chair and hand it to Sylvain. And you can complete our online survey at DEFYDementia.org. If you're interested in more than just a survey, as I said before, you can go to the Toronto Dementia Research Alliance research page, and you can see all sorts of studies that are going on around the city. And just some final thank yous, Judith and Nicole, but also everyone here at Shepherd Village. Wendy, I don't know if Wendy's still here. I think she had to leave, but Wendy and Kathy and Iris and Angelica and all of the volunteers, thank you for helping make today possible. I want to give a round of applause for the amazing Shepherd Village folks. Thanks also to our event partner, the Center for Learning, Research, and Innovation, and the whole DEFY Dementia team. Raise your hands, DEFY Dementia team, if you can. Amazing group of people. Thank you so much. And I want to also thank, in absentia, my co-host, Jay Ingram, and especially thanks to Roseanne Alyong, Sylvain de Bourquois, Yael Bar, Suzanne Pere, Natalie Leventhal, Denise Burba, Salma Sultan, Lara Smits, Abby McMohan, and Ben Schaub. Thank you to everyone for all of your support. But most importantly, thank you to everyone here for bearing it out with us here and, sharing your stories with us. And, I was so happy to hear all of the stories about how people's prayers were answered in coming here. And I hope that's true for everyone. And I hope whatever your prayers are, they are answered, and they're answered soon. So thank you to everybody.